Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Farmer Doug, for leading us. And now I have a nickname. I'm not exactly sure how to live up to being an Iceman. Maybe I'll wear blue every day. I don't know. I wanted to express my thanksgiving, my gratitude for all who were able to participate yesterday at Pete Night Days. When we get together as people and we work together, there's a camaraderie and a fellowship and friendships that build. When we're there, some years we're sweating it out in the heat and getting sunburnt, and other years we're bundling up and wearing we have church t-shirts that we put on that says Crossfield Baptist Church, and they looked a little tight this year because we put them over top of our coats, and so we looked a little pudgier than we normally do. And that was not because we ate too many hot dogs, I have to say that. I just wanted to thank you all for being part of that. It's wonderful for our community to see that you in your normal element where you work and in your families day to day, and all of a sudden they see you come together as a church and being able to bless and give away free food. That's just a wonderful thing. So thank you for joining in. It does a lot of good in many ways. This morning, for my message, today marks the last message I'm going to preach on Elijah and Elisha. Next week, I will share a message about Father's Day, and after that, I'm going to begin a sermon series in the summertime on the book of Titus. Along the way, you'll have a few guest speakers when I'm away on holidays, but we have things planned out I haven't planned out September yet, but there's good things coming. But for today, we want to remember all that God has done through Elijah and Elisha. If you could think about through the stories and you thumb through 1st and 2nd Kings, and as we've learned, one of the primary things that God was trying to do through these two prophets was to eliminate Baal worship in Israel. He was trying to encourage them to have a new beginning in the northern kingdom of Israel. And God was gracious to Israel as he provided opportunities for them to follow his will. He had Elijah and Elisha perform a number of different miracles and providing messages for them. But seeing God's plan and following God's plan are two different things. And it's not always easy to hear God's will and his direction and then to follow it. In Israel's history, it's quite complicated. There's plenty of idolatry and rebellion. There's repentance and there's forgiveness. There's, at times, other nations come to conquer and exile the people of God. This series today ends with the possibility of a bright future. But it requires faith and obedience, which does not actually work out in Israel's favor to the degree that it should have. There is a rising power in the ancient Near East during this time, and it's the nation of Assyria. The Assyrians are building in power, military might. They're becoming a stronger nation. Eventually, they will become the dominant empire. Now, faith and obedience to God would have protected the people of God from a powerful empire. But in about 80 years from Elisha's death, the Assyrian Empire will conquer the northern nation of Israel and exile its people. Today's story is seen as a bit of a reprieve from being conquered by neighboring nations. As you might have heard throughout many sermons in your lives, these nations were constantly at war. Sometimes they were allies, and other times they fought. Sometimes it was just border skirmishes, and sometimes there were full-blown invasions. But as we explore today's text, I'd like us to keep in mind about God's plan, God's vision for his people. And it's something that needs to be sought, and it needs to be obeyed. Trust in the Lord must be at the forefront of anyone who believes in God, and then to follow his commands. Elijah and Elisha displayed this trust in the Lord. They served as examples of what the kings of those nations should have been like. How the kings should have encouraged the people of God in faith and trust in Yahweh. But it didn't always work out that way. There were times of drought and famine and war, and they could have encouraged the people to keep trusting in God during those times. But the kings did not. Many of them abandoned faith in God altogether. They trusted in other idols like Baal. and, well, a wide variety of other idols. We're going to see some of them here in the text today. And eventually, the Israelites paid the consequences of breaking their commitment, their covenant to God in the Mosaic covenant. But God always had a plan of redemption. There's always this hope for good news behind the tragedy and consequences of sin. However, we need to remember that God has a plan. He has a vision. He has a direction for his people. We can explore that direction in the ancient past. What were the Israelites supposed to do? What were they supposed to become? But what about for us today? More on that at the end of my message, but for now, let us read from 2 Kings chapter 13, verse 10 to 25. In the 37th year of Joash, king of Judah, Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, became king of Israel in Samaria, and he reigned 16 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord and did not turn away from any of the signs of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. He continued in them. As for the other events of the reign of Jehoash, all he did and his achievements, including his war against Amaziah, king of Judah, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Jehoash rested with his ancestors, and Jeroboam succeeded him on the throne. Jehoash was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. Now Elisha had been suffering from the illness from which he died. Jehoash, king of Israel, went down to see him and wept over him. My father, he cried, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. Elisha said, get a bow and some arrows. And he did so. Take the bow in your hands, he said to the king of Israel. And when he had taken it, Elisha put his hands on the king's hands. Open the east window, he said, and he opened it. Shoot, Elijah said, and he shot. The Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Aram, Elisha declared. You will completely destroy the Arameans at Aphek. Then he said, take the arrows, and the king took them. Elisha told him, strike the ground. He struck it 3 times and stopped. The man of God was angry with him and said, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. Then you would have defeated Aram and completely destroyed it. But now you will defeat it only 3 times. Elisha died and was buried. Now Moabite raiders used to enter the country every spring. Once, while some Israelites were burying a man, suddenly they saw a band of raiders, so they threw the man's body in Elisha's tomb. When the body touched Elisha's bones, the man came back to life and stood up on his feet. Hazael, king of Aram, oppressed Israel throughout the reign of Jehoahaz. But the Lord was gracious to them and had compassion and showed concern for them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. To this day, he has been unwilling to destroy them or banish them from his presence. Hazael, king of Aram, died, and Ben-Hadad, his son, succeeded him as king. Then Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, recaptured from Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael, the towns he had taken in battle from his father Jehoahaz. 3 times Jehoash defeated him, and so he recovered the Israelite towns. You know, there's a lot of J names in that text. I was a little surprised I got through them all without stumbling. I have 3 points for us this morning. The first is about history, in verse 10 to 13. And I want to mention that the 3 points I'm going to share with you from the text today, I'm going to draw application in 3 ways from these 3 points. So you might want to pay attention to what's going on here in the text. Today's story begins with some preamble about King Jehoash. He reigned for 16 years after his father Jehoahaz had died. And then it says that Jehoash died. And what happens is, after that, which will be my second point in a short while, is a story, one story about this king that they're telling you about here. Jehoash was known as an evil king, causing the Israelites to continue in the sins of Jeroboam. Now, what are the sins of Jeroboam? I mentioned this a few weeks ago, but I'll bring it up again here today. Jeroboam was actually the first king of a divided Israel. In 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 9, the prophet Ahijah clearly states the sins of Jeroboam. He says, you have done more evil than all who lived before you. You have made for yourself other gods, idols made of metal. You have aroused God's anger and turned your back on God. Jeroboam's sin was idolatry. He created and worshiped gods other than the Lord. But you have to remember something. There was King Saul, there was King David, and then there was King Solomon. During King Solomon's reign, God divided the nation of Israel into two parts because of his sin. And so the northern 10 Israelite tribes were in what are called the northern kingdom of Israel. The southern two were in what's called the southern kingdom of Judah. Jeroboam became the first king of the northern kingdom, and he led the people into idolatry. Even though the Lord gave him that northern kingdom, he turned away from God. But I want you to notice something here in this text, in this story during Elisha's time. It says that Jehoash led the Israelites into the sins of Jeroboam, into worshiping idols. But notice that there's no mention of Baal. Right? That's been what this whole sermon series has been about with Elijah and Elisha, is God rooting out Baal worship from the kingdom of Israel. And it happened. You might remember last week's message with King Jehu and how he completely annihilated all of the prophets and King Ahab's line and his friends, his priests, the chief men, and all the advisors, and anybody else who was connected to Ahab. They're all dead. Here, a while later, there's no mention of Baal anymore. God accomplished what he said he was going to accomplish. Now King Jehu of Israel and King Hazael of Aram purged Baal worship as best they could, but those two kingdoms remained enemies. They kept fighting against each other. Now during this time, I mentioned earlier in my introduction, there's that other military power that's rising up, the Assyrians. They were growing stronger and stronger, and they were causing the nation of Aram to focus fighting on them as well. And so they were fighting kind of on two fronts, which gave Israel a bit of a reprieve. But by 796 BC, the Assyrians will have taken over the city of Damascus, which was where King of Aram was reigning from. And so you see this shifting of power. One kingdom was rising, the other one was falling, and Israel's kind of caught in the middle here. This is one of the ways that the Israelites were able to push the Arameans back, is because there's other powers fighting Hazael. But from there, the Assyrians would eventually push into Israel, demanding tribute or threatening invasion, which I shared with you earlier on. In about 80 years from this time, they will conquer the nation. The rest of Jehoash's reign is actually largely unimportant. The author of 2 Kings doesn't mention anything else about him other than he was an evil king, and one story of how he's connected to Elisha. So let's go into the next section and learn about the one and only story that this king gets to be remembered for. And point number 2 is prophecy and final miracle. Elisha is ill. He's also old. One of the things you will not know from the text I read to you today is that there's 40 years between when Jehu was anointed as king. Remember that young prophet who came in to the battlefront and anointed Jehu, and Jehu had to tell his commanders, this young crazy prophet, crazy preacher came and anointed me and said, I'm king over Israel. And he became king. 40 years has passed since then. Elisha's old. He's not doing well. Now, part of the story that may intrigue you is that Elisha has no miracle for himself. He doesn't heal himself. He's done a lot of other miracles for a lot of other people. There's none for him. He's ill. There's no healing. He is going to die, and he will not rise from the dead. Instead, Jehoash's only memorable story is about his relationship with Elisha in this one particular instance. Now, this relationship would have not been a good one. Idol worship was still rampant in Israel despite Elisha's best efforts. The king kept promoting it. But when the king cries out, my father, it is a time of last respects. That's what this king is doing. He's giving last respects. and they're being paid to the most prominent prophet in the land. The expression is a statement of honor of a younger generation to the older. And when he says the chariots and horsemen of Israel, the king is acknowledging the role Elisha played in the land of Israel. Not just in the land of individuals, but in military conquest as well. And that Elisha's memory is the same, and his legacy is the same as that of his master, Elijah. Remember when the fiery horses and chariot came and picked him up, took him up in a whirlwind? Final blessings in stories like this are common. You might remember that Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 33 gave his final blessings, or Jacob in the book of Genesis gave his final blessings to his kids. During these final respects, though, Elisha told the king to get a bow and some arrows. There's one last prophecy and blessing he can give before he passes away. The king did so. Elisha placed his hands on the king's hands. And he told the king to get an arrow and fire it out the east window towards Aram. The arrow represented the victory that they will have against the Arameans, specifically when they retake the city of Aphek, and they did eventually. However, there's more. Elisha then told him to take some more arrows and strike the ground with them. This is not magic or sorcery here. Rather, it's an action that shows the faith and obedience of the king. So when he hit the ground only 3 times, or knocked the arrows on the ground 3 times, Elisha grew angry. The king should have continued to knock on the ground with the arrows more. 5 or 6 times, Elisha said. The first arrow fired represented victory at one city. These other 3 arrows will represent 3 victories that they'll have over Aram, but not the rest of the victories that they needed to take the rest of their land back. This is small in number. And the king's failure to continue knocking his arrows on the ground is a bit of a statement of the king's faith and resolution to listen and to obey what God was saying through the prophet Elisha. So Israel will only win 3 victories over their enemy, and that does come to pass. These were Elisha's final recorded words. And after this prophecy, he dies. He was buried, most likely near his home, which was close to the Moabite border. We don't know exactly where it is, but it's over in that area, close to the Jordan River, which is why there were Moabite raiders in the next part of this text, of the story. As the text mentioned, raiders came into nations at the springtime all the time. It was just common practice. Oh, look, it's spring. Let's go kill people and steal stuff. Right? No, most of us clean our homes, clean up our yard, cut the grass, and do other types of things. No, the raiders got to go out. And so Elisha was buried. We have these Moabite raiders in the story, but somebody else had died at this point. And when the mourners who were carrying the body saw the Moabite raiders charging toward them, they threw the man's body into Elisha's tomb instead of his own. They couldn't make it to his tomb. Now, this would have been a temporary placement, because they want to put him in his own tomb. But when his body touched Elisha's bones, he came back to life. I always wondered what happened to this guy, though. Imagine this. He comes back to life in a grave. Surprise. He sees the mourners and his grave clothes on. He sees the Moabite raiders off in the distance. I mean, this is not the best situation to be caught with your pants down. But that's what happens to this guy. What happened to him? We don't know. But Elisha's last miracle was to raise someone from the dead with his own dead bones. And he's not even awake for it. He's not alive for it. And this story is kind of like a final punctuation point at the end of a long story that just testified that this man was called by God, that God used him to perform miracles, to spread God's word, what he wanted, his vision, his direction, his plan for the people of Israel. He was a man who God used to show kindness and truth and direction for anybody who would listen. And there was just this one last thing that God needed to do to end Elisha's work. And that's to fulfill the prophecy that Elisha uttered on his deathbed. And that's point number 3, the fulfillment. The last part of this story centers around Hazael, the assassin of the former king of Aram. You might remember that story. We looked at that one as well. So Hazael killed the king of Aram, took the throne, and he's been a thorn in Israel's side ever since he took the throne. He also was part of God's plan to root out Baal worship. During his reign, he was a plague to the Israelites, and Hazael was constantly at war with them. And in verse 23, it says that God was gracious to the Israelites because of the covenant made with them. God did not allow Israel to be totally destroyed or banished from his presence. That type of idea actually comes 80 years later with the exile of the northern kingdom of Israel. God has a plan, though. Not only do we see a plan here and we see a plan in the future in 80 years, but there's also a plan of redemption later when people come back to the land. However, in this story, Hazael, this king that was a thorn in Israel's side, died. And it was during this time, after his death, that Jehoash and the Israelite army grew in power, and they recaptured their towns. And they had 3 victories, just as Elijah prophesied. Thus, the prophecy with knocking the arrows was fulfilled. And at the end of these stories, Elijah and Elisha, as we think back through everything that we've learned, what can we glean for our lives today? I have 3 things I want to point out for us, for Crossfield Baptist Church today. And they are important things. It will change you. It will change your church. It will change your future. The first one is remove the sticks. What is the legacy of the Israelites and their kings? It's mixed with some good kings and some bad. There was idolatry at times, and other times they banished it. Jezebel's legacy is as a sinful woman, one who led Israel into Baal worship. And her legacy was left as dog dung on the ground, literally. Ahab, and him being an evil king, and all of his descendants, their legacy was complete annihilation. They're gone. They're off the face of the earth. But what about our legacy? What is the legacy, the history thus far of Crossfield Baptist Church over the last 10 years? Was it all bad? Was it all good? If you were to write down the legacy of the last 10 years of our church, write it down like a book, like the Book of Kings did. What would the story of our church be peppered with? Is it peppered with and written about praise and worship, blessings and evangelism, discipleship and prayer meetings? Are there other things in there like broken relationships? Is there possible idolatry, maybe that snuck into some of our lives? What does following the Lord look like over the last 10 years? It's before my time. I've only been here for 2. The reason I ask this question is because it is extremely important to process our legacy, to know exactly where we are at today and how we got here, so that we can see where we need to go. Imagine for a moment somebody dropped you off in the middle of a forest by airplane, and they gave you a parachute, thankfully, dropped you off, you landed safely, you have no idea where you were, no idea. And somebody said, walk home. You can't walk home until you know where you are. We have to know where we are. That is the first point of my application today. Where are we? If we have been praying for God to bring His vision and His vision alone, we need to know what assumptions, what preferences we are bringing to the table. We need to know our past, our history, our relationships, because those things can cloud our judgment and our understanding and cloud our obedience to God and His will for our church. We must process the past and reconcile the broken relationships that we have left behind. We must apologize for our part in them, if there are any. And then intentionally and persistently listen to God and His direction for us. Our history, with all of the good and the bad, can serve as an unhelpful anchor that ties us to the past and makes us react in the future. It can get us off course because something's tugging on us. So no matter how much we might pray and seek God's face for His will and direction for our church, no matter how many questions we ask, and no matter how much time we spend looking in God's vision for our church, the past will slingshot us backwards every time unless we have truly and intentionally reconciled the past and the broken relationships that might still be lingering in our hearts. These things we need to have a release of its grip on us so that we can start to move forward. And I'd like to give you an illustration what I mean and why I titled this application, Remove the Sticks. How many of you here are currently raising boys? You have some boys in your family and you're raising them. Okay. Good luck. Here's a story. When I was younger, I lived in Swift Current most of my growing up years, but I lived also in some small communities outside of Swift Current in Saskatchewan. And in one of those communities, it was called Wymark. And in Wymark, there were it's just all gravel roads. Okay, it's a small village, not many people there. They're pretty much all related, and that's where we lived. And lo and behold, I was about 7 years old. My younger brother was 5. My older brother was 12. And we thought, oh, this is a great idea. We were riding our bikes, and we thought, you know what? Maybe, just maybe, what we should do is ride our bikes really fast and throw sticks in the spokes and see if those sticks will just come and hit the frame of the bike and snap the sticks. And that'll be exciting and great. So that's what we did. So one of us would ride our bike in front of the others super fast, and we'd be throwing sticks to try to get a stick in the spokes. And couldn't get it in. The spokes were moving too fast, the bike was moving too fast, and that we had bad aim. We just kept hitting the kid on the bike. And so we kept trying. And then we thought, you know what, we're going to have to slow down our bike riding. So there's this one time I was on my bike and I was driving slow in front of my brothers, and they had taken their sticks and they would chuck sticks. And lo and behold, one went into my spokes. And that's where I flew over the handlebars. Hit the gravel, got all scraped up. And, well, that's why I am the way I am today. Folks, we need to remove the sticks in our spokes. There's things there that will make us fall over our handlebars, hurt us, and hurt others around us. We need to remove the sticks. And I want to encourage us, maybe with something a bit more specific. If there are broken relationships from the past, I'd like you to go and apologize for your part in it by the end of summer, so that by the time September rolls around, we don't have sticks in the spokes anymore, and we can gain momentum and move forward with God's will, God's vision, and God's direction. First, remove the sticks. Second, God's vision and direction. Now, while we process the past and try to fulfill the healing that needs to come, we must continue to ask God every day for His vision and direction for our church. We must ask Him to heal our wounds, reconcile the past, so that we can hear and see clearly His plans. The elders and I have been working on possible vision ideas and gathering information that you have given to us. We have shared that information with you, and we continue to work on this. One of the things I've noticed is that sometimes working on vision and mission of the church and the values of the church, it takes a while. Part of the reason for that is the same thing that Habakkuk, the prophet Habakkuk, experienced. And you can read about it in chapter 3 of his book, if you can find it in the Minor Prophet section. He learned that he needed to wait upon the Lord until God gave his direction, and it will not go any faster than that. It is God in his timing that will grant Habakkuk the vision he needed and the vision that we need. God will give us his vision when he's good and ready. And it's often that he gives us his vision when we are good and ready. Process the past, get rid of the sticks, and start searching and praying. Not start, but continue to search and to pray and to ask God, what is it you want us to do? What do we need to become? What do we do with the resources that have been given to us? The things that are clear in our pursuit of God's vision thus far, from all the information we've gathered through all the prayer, all the scripture reading, everything that we have done as a congregation thus far, I'd like to give you 5 things that are abundantly clear. The focus that we have pretty much all of us have agreed on, the vast majority of us anyways, and I think that once you hear them today, I think you're all going to be in agreement. The 5 areas of focus that we have seen become clear have been to do a great job in our youth ministry, our children ministry, our worship ministry, in evangelism and reaching our community, and in offering discipleship and training for us to grow in our faith. 5 areas. Those are undisputed. These things were so loud and clear that they were just repeated over and over and over again. The values that we have all shared and the conclusions that we've come on about our church values, there were 2 that were the primary ones that just were above all the rest. 2 values that we hold very dear in our church is faith and family. And what that means is that we now need to consider how we can, through these values of faith and family, support and develop and volunteer in the ministries that we know we need to do a great job of. It does not mean that other ministries are unimportant, nor does it mean that other ministries will be ignored or canceled. What it means is that we have top priorities, and we cannot neglect them. In fact, we need to create a plan on how to do them well. And these ministries will become part of our legacy for the foreseeable future. Our vision must be more than just words and sentiments, though. Vision must be lived. Our values must be more than just written on a piece of paper. They need to be seen. Now, while many of us here have been volunteering and helping in a wide variety of ways, I want to encourage you on how we can open up our hearts, our time, our talents, our budgets to see this vision completed along with a strategic plan to accomplish it. We still have some work ahead of us. It will require sacrifice. It will require training. In fact, I'd like to see evangelism training seminars available for everyone in our church to teach all of us how to share the gospel, and also evangelism training courses on how to defend the gospel through apologetics. These are needed tools for all of you to reach your community, your friends, your neighbors, your family. If we are serious about reaching our community, we need to be trained. We need to be discipled. And I hope that you will consider engaging in this training and possibly even facilitate it. You will grow as Christians, but we will have to be intentional and sacrificial. There's no other way to mature. You can even start this summer if you would like to by watching some material on Right Now Media about evangelism. And if you want to access that, you can contact the church office and we can help you with that. Or you can even do a Google search for evangelism training. And there are a ton of videos on YouTube that you can watch and learn and grow and be trained in it, so that you have the tools necessary for those opportunities when they come. And they will come. We have events like Pete Night Days, rodeos, social clubs, food banks, and anything else in our communities that's ongoing. We can be involved in them. It's the only way to build relationships and also to build our community's trust so that they would even consider listening to the idea that God loves them, that God created and designed this universe, and that God wants them to go to heaven. We need to prove our love and our dedication to our community to build their trust. By aligning our will with God's, we are essentially knocking an arrow onto a bow, allowing God's hands to guide our aim. And when we release the arrow, our aim will be true. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. So from Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6. We must trust the Lord and follow his will. Now, I'm going to invite our worship team to come up now, but I want to share with you the third point of application as they come and get ready. A new legacy. By working through and reconciling the past, and by embracing and moving forward in the present with God's vision for us through intentional discipleship and training and focusing on the ministries that are the priorities, we will leave a lasting legacy of faith and of family. We will leave a different legacy than that of Jezebel and so many of the kings of Israel. We can remember the lessons through Elijah and Elisha by being people of faith and obedience to God's holy word, because when God spoke and gave the prophets a message, they acted on it. It's our turn to be the prophets. While we may not have prophets exactly like Elijah and Elisha running around today, we do have the Bible. It is the Word of God. It will be a light in the darkness. It will be encouragement when we are hurt. It will be a source of wisdom when we are confused. And it will guide us into God's will. Allow yourselves to be called up to God's vision, to embrace it, to believe it, to be changed by it. Keep praying. Keep submitting to God. Keep reconciling with others. Keep pulling sticks out of the spokes. Keep your eyes on Jesus.